City has always had a rich English language cultural scene. Yet, English-speaking personalities often fly under the radar. This short documentary series will put them into the spotlight by presenting different angles of this vibrant and close-knit community. This episode's angle, literature, dives into Quebec City's literary scene through the words and lyrics of author Neil Besundat, poet and songwriter Orion Haller, and the executive director of the Voice of English-Speaking Quebec, Bridget Wellens. Orion Haller's deep, warm voice perfectly suits the lyrics of his indie folk band, the Orion Haller Band. Based in Quebec City for the past 10 years, he is an award-winning poet, a singer and songwriter, as well as a high school literature teacher.
I'm from a small town in British Columbia, just west of the Rockies, called Salmon Arm, known for its forest fires now, and Deep Lake.
Since he was a child, Neil Besundat has known he wanted to be a writer. Identity in all its forms is at the heart of his many literary works. Established in Quebec City for decades, he is a professor of creative writing at Université Laval and has a deep love for Quebec City.
I was born in Trinidad in the West Indies in 1955, and I moved to Toronto, in fact, in 1973 at the age of 18.
Bridget Wellens is the executive director of the Voice of English-Speaking Quebec, an organization that connects the English-speaking community in a mainly Francophone city. Through VEQ's projects, such as a podcast series created by local Anglophone youth, she feels that she's making an important difference in the community.
I'm originally from Montreal. I was born and raised there. My parents were multilingual, so my dad spoke English and my mom spoke French. Both of them actually addressed each other in their own language, so conversations at supper time were in both languages. I only spoke to my mom in French, and I only spoke to my father in English. So it was a really interesting upbringing.
I went to university, and I knew I wanted to be a writer already, and I knew I'd be writing in English, which is my native language. I also was really interested in the French language. So I moved to Toronto to learn French. Quebec came into my life not through studies, but through a young lady. Eventually, I came down for a visit. I came to Quebec City for a visit. I had planned a 2-week visit. I arrived, and I never left.
I moved to Quebec City in 2005 for work. I had been working in the lumber industry as a hardwood flooring manufacturer buyer. I'd been there for a few years, and one of my suppliers ended up offering me a job, which entailed a move to Quebec City.
My father actually was born in Quebec City. He was from Quebec, an Anglophone from Quebec, and met my mother at Expo 67 and followed her back out to BC. And they were hippies back in the woods, and that's where I was raised. And then I met a Québécoise at UBC. And after some forays into the United States and teaching down there, we ended up back here in Quebec City and make sure our children were raised in French.
I knew nothing about Quebec City when I first moved here. I had no friends, no family. I knew no one except for my new boss. I just automatically assumed that Quebec City was Francophone and that there was no English-speaking community.
My mother is Austrian, so she spoke French with us growing up. So at least I was not a stranger to the language when I arrived. Yeah, it's not perfect French by any stretch of the imagination, but it was certainly enough for me to feel at home here in Quebec City.
I'm very amused at the idea of Quebec City having an English community. Actually, I'm not sure what it is. Certainly we're here in the Morrin Centre, and this is a wonderful jewel. It's a secret. So few people know about the beauty of this place with the library and all of that.
The Victorian Library of the Literary and Historical Society of Quebec has been here since 1868. The space, which was once filled with prison cells, is now lined with over 27,000 books and welcomes over 60,000 visitors per year. It is an active membership-based library, and when members join, they are joining the LHSQ, one of the oldest existing learned societies in Canada. Here, tradition and innovation coexist. 18th century books from the Quebec Library collection are on display, while members can browse the latest award-winning books. The library not only provides the backdrop for literary talks by writers and historians, but it is also a lively space for members of the community to gather. The Morrin Centre offers a wide array of activities alongside a growing collection of physical and digital books to borrow and discuss. Throughout the year, book clubs, workshops, and English discussion groups meet. And on Saturday mornings, children gather here for a weekly story time. The Morrin Centre and its library houses artifacts that reflect not only the rich history of the English-speaking population of the region, but also the legacy of the society and its active role in the intellectual life of Quebec City over the past 200 years.
The community is very diverse, increasingly diverse. Every 5 years, 20 to 25% of our population is renewed by newcomers. So that's a lot of movement, either people coming from other provinces or from all over the world, really. So it means that the face of the community is forever changing, and it's not the community that it used to be. But I think it brings about so much more richness, and that diversity is what we need in Quebec City, and I think it's just great.
I think the Anglophone community as such in Quebec City is so well integrated, just about everybody speaks French, which is what I think is the ideal. The ideal is, yes, you may have your first language, no matter whether it be English, Italian, Spanish, but then you can be, and must allow yourself to be, part of the larger community in which you're living, which is in here, the Francophone community.
I remember driving the moving truck up to Quebec City and parking it. I parked it actually in Série, where I figured no one would break into it. And then I got a hotel here in the old city, and it was raining and it was cool, and I could buy a baguette and I could speak French, and it just felt like home, right? So it was nice to be back in Canada, and nice to be back in this sort of city. Was different.
I don't know what it means to be totally Québécois or to be totally anything. I write a lot about identity in my fiction and in my non-fiction as well. And I think one of the things I've come to realize is that identity is an incredibly complex thing. If I'm asked, well, who are you in terms of what's your identity, I would have to reply in the plural. I would have to say, well, we are. Because I am someone who was born in the Caribbean. I am someone who is a descendant of Indian immigrants from India at the end of the 19th century. I am someone who emigrated, lived in Toronto for 16 years. I am someone who loves Quebec and feels at home in Quebec. I am someone who feels at home and loves Spain as well, who feels at home in Paris. I am all of these people.
Voice of English Speaking Quebec is carrying out a number of different initiatives for youth in the schools, intergenerational activities between youth and seniors. It means sometimes having the sense that you're doing a whole lot of work with not a lot of money, and you wonder if you're having an impact. And every now and then we get that person that calls us or sends us an email and says that we changed their life, or that what we did made a difference in their day-to-day life, and they're going to succeed here because of it. That's what drew me to the English-speaking community, and that's what keeps me in that job, because I do know we're making a difference. We have a number of punctual, so usually they last a year. They start April 1st and end March 31st. Projects where we want to promote linguistic duality, so we help people practice their second language, whether it's French or English, and bring people together. And we also have a podcast project going on, which is very interesting. So I thought, well, I'm going to apply for funding to do another podcast where I'm going to give the mic to youth in our region, in high school or in CEGEP or out of school and in a brand new job. The topics were way more mature in some instances that I had ever imagined. One talked about racism. I thought that they were really, really mature. For high school kids, I was really impressed.
Hi, and welcome to this new episode of My Quebec City. My name is Kayla, and today I am with
Ramin and Agrima.
I wanted to know, what is your definition about racism for you guys?
Well, according to the dictionary, racism is a systematic oppression of a racial group to the economic, political advantage of another. Well, me personally, I would agree with this definition because I think that racism is basically the discrimination and oppression of a person because of their race and ethnic background.
At first, we heard about the Voice of English Quebec doing a podcast from our club. So I heard about the opportunity and I was really interested. So I went to the workshop and this is where I met these two here. And we both wanted to do a podcast similar. We had similar ideas. So we combined our ideas and did one podcast about racism and discrimination in the school environment, really.
And then we got started in the workshops. We started brainstorming, and we found that we had a lot to say about the racism that we had. So we made our podcast basically about racism that we've experienced, that people our age in our community would have experienced. And I thought that was interesting.
We didn't hear a lot about it at school at first, and with our podcast, we kind of bring that subject again as a debate. And I know some people were like thinking more about this and thinking, oh, maybe I never thought that they would go through this. So by doing this, we kind of held them a little with this and to bring this debate up again with everyone.
And feel like in terms of community and people from different backgrounds who come in Quebec City, I feel like there's a lot more work that could be done in terms of helping them feel included and belong in the community. And yeah.
The city is an inspiration that it gives me the space to write, the space to imagine. Not every place is like that. There are places where you are not comfortable. And when I'm not comfortable, I can't write. I need to have a sense of belonging, a sense of being centered, in order to free my imagination to allow the characters to arise. And I have that in Quebec City. And in fact, I'll tell you a story. In 2001, winter of 2001, I was working on a certain project, and when I write all day. At the end of the day, I like to go out for a walk. It was -30, I remember, in Quebec City that day. But at the end of my working day, I got dressed and I went out for a walk along Chemin Saint-Louis, close to where I live. And when I walk like that, I refuse to think. I don't want to think about writing or anything. I want to have my head emptied. So as I'm walking along, however, a scene started. Suddenly, I saw this young man standing in a very small office encumbered with stacks of portfolios, dust all around, and in front of him, a bald man talking to him. And I heard their conversation. And I thought, I knew, my instinct told me that this is the beginning of a novel. So I went back home, sat down in my study, and scribbled everything that had come to me. Normally, that's fine. The next morning, however, I realized that the character was still there. I saw where he was, I saw what he was seeing, I could feel what he was feeling, but the words to write it would not come. And so instead of getting frustrated, which is the worst thing that a writer can accept, I decided to pack up, dress up, and head back outside. And the words started to flow. And I scribbled, and I did this for several days running. Just writing by hand, quickly, not working, not thinking about language or words or anything, just writing everything that was happening in this opening chapter. The mystery of it is that there I was sitting in front of the St. Lawrence, frozen, ice, surrounded by several feet of snow, writing a novel that was taking place in a hot, tropical country. There was a sense of quietude that I had there, that I get from Quebec City, that allowed this novel to emerge. That's what Quebec City gives me, in terms of writing. But when it comes to my fiction, I don't decide anything. I'm one of those writers who explores through writing. I discover my characters through my writing. And the characters dictate everything to me, including the language that they're going to speak. As it was with this man in the short story, he decided to speak to me in French, so I wrote him in French. My other characters so far have been just talking to me in English. So I write them in English. But I'm completely open to that, to everything that the characters give to me. It's the only way that I can write.
Every April since 2010, English language book lovers filled the halls of the Morrin Centre for the Imagination Writers Festival, a destination for readers and writers alike. The week-long festival features acclaimed and up-and-coming writers from across Canada and beyond, creating an intimate atmosphere that promotes creativity, diversity, and all things literary. Miriam Taze, Will Ferguson, Essie Adijan, Kim Tui, Lawrence Hill, Heather O'Neill, Sean Michaels, Lee Miracle are just some of the outstanding authors who have appeared at the Centre. Over the years, the festival has integrated innovative events into its programming, allowing readers to connect with books and literature on a new level. For instance, in one of the most popular activities, Books and Wine, books by festival authors are paired with wines selected by a local sommelier. Other tasty events, such as a culinary demonstration by cookbook authors, have also taken place during the festival. Another event, Literary Notes, is a partnership between the Morrin Centre and the Orchestre Symphonique de Québec that matches literature with pieces of classical music performed by OSQ musicians. Finally, there is Imagination in Schools. In recent years, the in-school programming during the festival has significantly expanded by facilitating author visits to many institutions in the region, from primary and secondary schools to cégeps. Over the past 13 years, the festival has anchored itself in Quebec City's cultural landscape as well as the Canadian literary scene and will continue to be an important part of both.
I started writing. I did a lot of creative writing through early university and then had a band in Vancouver. And then when I moved here in 2004, I started a band shortly after arriving. And so I've always had various bands and ensembles in addition to my writing and poetry and short fiction. I've always done both sort of indie folk music and also spoken word performances. I find my inspiration from a variety of sources. I just finished an album with my band called Songs to See By, and the entire album was based on works of art by Canadian artists, sculptures, paintings, some photography also. So sometimes it's in conversation with other artists. And for poetry, the book I'm working right now is just reflection on my personal life. I started it actually during COVID, so it's a much more personal reflection. But also my poetry, my last book was based for the most part on works of art. So I seek that that interdisciplinary conversation between the arts. I'm working now with an artist in Montreal. It's a new project for me. So my idea was that I would approach an artist and I would say, I'd like to give you some poems and I'd like you to base a new work on one of my works. And then you give me some suggestions for what I can pick from your work, and then we'll provide a poem for that, and then we'll do an exchange, and then we'll print the poem on the work itself as a broadsheet, and sell those as works of art / poetry. So that's my latest project. The reason I got into teaching after doing many other things. I taught music. I worked as a community animator. I worked as a consultant for the school board for the arts. But it was with a lot of pleasure to pick up creative writing again, to pick up my study of literature and share my love and my passion for the things that I do. It's nice to be able to, especially at high school and secondary 4 and 5, you can really read more complex novels and complex work and actually have the students produce something that's really quite advanced. This afternoon, I will perform a spoken word piece called Tripwire. I recorded it a few years ago. I recall reading a story about a person who got up from their chair on their deck and a meteor, just a small meteor, had pierced a hole through the chair, and he could have been sitting there. So I went through just thinking about the possibility, is he going to sit back down on the chair? Is he going to get back on the deck, even though knowing what are the chances that another meteor would pierce in the same spot? Is he going to get back on? So it's that conversation of, in life, are we able to live lightly and to be vulnerable in the midst of such darkness and fear and violence? Are we able to remain vulnerable and to just sit and wait? So that's what that poem is about, and it seemed very current with the current situation and things going on in the world. So.
There are tripwires stretched tight as mandolin strings in the blanket night, and the meteor shower sings through ozone, leaves bits of itself in the field, and the plastic chair on the deck still smoking where you sat. There are shadows hiding in ditches like moths clocking headlights, small feral creatures with suicidal itches, the predictable teabag dribble of the spent. There are recalls on next year's model, a fault in the design that will be aesthetically fatal, and recollections sniffing at the door like a lost dog you got over. He has the nose of a lover, as faithful as the tide. There are tripwires stretched tight as mandolin strings in the blanket night, where preemption is a ring of keys so heavy no pockets can withstand their barbs. The jealous holes that hold nothing smaller than a fist is the first to strike, like a match in a box of matches that set the rest alight. It smudges the face with charcoal and ochre and unlocks the doors to abandoned corridors where moss had begun its work. It hardens the heart that is a muscle that functions better when it's light. The thicker the arms, the slower the flight. There are tripwires stretched tight as mandolin strings in the blanket night. Sooner or later, what pulls will convince its twin to slip the pin and bring you to your knees, which are hinges that should be limber from habit. But instead, you are still surprised, still upstaged. This is your choice, this fragile fruit that bruises dark to mark where it was touched. This undefended city spilling out from its walls into fields where whole neighborhoods plant themselves in the open, like vineyards whose yield will be sampled by crows. Nobody knows the hour, but watch the clock, which is nothing but a flower, each petal a convergence of generosity, a reason to be luminous. There are mandolins blanketing the night. Their strings stretch out of sight. This is your choice, this fragile fruit that bruises dark to mark where it was touched. What will it take for you to return to the deck, to your chair that is still hot from the poetry of stars? How do you connect the dots? What is your astrology, things being what they are?